Hello and welcome to another Spark AR tutorial video. In this video we'll be making a Gibberish style filter. So for those who aren't fully aware, there is a current trend for a type of filter where you get given like a jumbled series of words or letters, and then you get given a time limit, and then you've got to figure out what the answer is after that, before that time runs out, and then it tells you the answer. So what I've done is I basically had a look at how to create such an effect. And I took the principles of found in the randomizer video series. So if you haven't checked it out, the link to the playlist will be in the description below. And tried to create a kind of 80s inspired aesthetic quiz show called Jumbled Up. I've just basically made up this fake quiz show name. And then in Spark started to create this effect. So some of this will be similar setup largely to the randomizer. We have a few little amendments and tweaks here and there just to make it a bit more aesthetically pleasing. You'll also see on screen a preview of it working. That says there's some footage I've took on Instagram of the effect working in action. But basically to sort of give you a sort of whistle-stop guide through it before we break down how this was created. When the user launches the effect, this little animation sequence for the Jumbled Up logo plays. This was created in After Effects and then saved as a PNG sequence. This animation sequence was then, it's 46 frames, and this was put into a texture sequence. That texture sequence is then linked to an animation player. So I went to Assets, Add Asset, Create Animation Sequence. Then from that I selected my textures, selected them all, and then made it into a texture sequence, and then applied that to a material. In this case the material was a plane. And again, I'll guide through this as we go through it, but once you launch the application, they press the hold and record button. When the record button is pressed, it will then randomise the question and the answer. I made sure each question and answer had the same value. So question 1 has the same corresponding value as answer 1, and so on and so on. Just so when the randomizer gives a value, it makes sure that both of them have got the same value. If my images have got slightly different names or in a slightly different order, this effect will have problems from that. So let's sort of go through a breakdown of how this was set up. And again, I'm not going to go through everything from the start because some of this stuff is covered in the randomizer video. So I would definitely encourage watching that if you haven't done so first. But this is just a quick preview of the patch sequence we will be creating. So let us start with a new project and get this ball rolling, so to speak. And I'll see you again in a second. Okay, so what we've got here is we'll just start off with a clean project. And what you'll find is I'll also be looking at my second monitor over here, just so I can see and double check everything as I go along. So if my eyes sort of switch between this position and this position, that's why. So I've already created my assets beforehand. So if I just go to my folder here, and just to give you a preview of what these assets should look like. And just open up the Jumbled Up folder. There we go. So I've created a library of assets. This is all going to be available via Gumroad and later on Patreon. So if you don't want to make your own, these will be available to purchase for a small charge. But basically I created 6 images initially. So there's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and time's up. So there's rough create our timer sequence, and obviously if I wanted it to be longer I would have more high values, etc. in that case. I just wanted 5 seconds just because it's a kind of, I think, a reasonable amount of time for this to be on screen. I also created my intro. So like I said at the beginning, I created this in After Effects and then I created it as a PNG sequence. So there's 45 or 46 different images here that when I import will be an image sequence, and we'll go for that in a sec. And I also then created, in my case, 5 questions. So these are just, again, still images, PNGs. And I also created 5 answers, and I made sure that each question and answer has the same value, so A1 will correspond to Q1 and so on. So question 1 and answer 1 should be linked up. So when I get to the later part and the results are shown, it should be more accurately displayed. And just switch back here. So all I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go import I'm going to go to add asset. I'm going to create my animation sequences first. So I'm going to go to animation sequence, just call this my logo, choose file, and just navigate to my logo sequence and import those. And some of these steps you can skip ahead, so feel free to skip ahead in the video, and I'll try and put little markers on the bottom of the timeline to sort of indicate where we get to certain stages so you can skip to that point. This is just the initial setup. I like to do this in every video for those who may not have watched other videos, so you can kind of see the process I go through. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a face tracker. So because we want the logo and the question and answers to appear above the head, I'm going to create this face tracker object. I'm going to right click on that and just add a plane. I'm going to pause my video for a second just so I can move it without it being wobbling around. And I want this to be longer than it is high, so I'm just going to use the scale tool. I'm not going to type in exact values here, I'm just going to eyeball it. And then going to, with that plane still selected, go to materials, create new material, select this new material that's been created, rename this first to be logo, change its type to be flat, and then change its texture to be my logo sequence. So when I hit play now, it should play my animation logo sort of on a loop, like so. Okay, so I'm just going to also rename this plane to be my intro plane. This could also be the logo. I'm just calling it intro for now. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a null object. And this null object I'm going to call questions. The reason for this is having a null object and having things parented to a null object means that null object controls everything within it, essentially. I've done it this way because for some people you might want to add other things in there, like particle systems, and it might be easier to control everything nestled within groups than it is as individual elements. But again, you might not need to do this necessarily for your products. I'm doing this because for me it just made more sense, so I can control when everything appears via the question null rather than as an individual plane. But anyway, so with that null object selected, I'm going to right click on it and create another plane. In fact, actually, I'm just going to undo that. I'm just going to select my intro plane. I'm going to copy that, and so I'm going to press Command D or Control D to duplicate. Drag this duplicate onto the questions. So I should have these two planes parented together. I'm also going to make sure that my questions null is a child of my face tracker. There we go. So with this new questions plane created, I'm just going to go to materials and create a new material and call this new material questions. So I'm going to now go back to my scene, add another asset. So I'm going to go create another animation sequence. This will be my questions, choose file, navigate to where my questions are created. So this is my 5 questions here. Select those. And making sure that my texture on that plane is now the questions plane. So you should see now that we have all these 5 questions on loop cycling really fast on the screen, which is exactly the way I want it to be at the moment. I'm just going to rename this plane questions just so I don't get confused later on. So now I've done that, I'm going to again select this and duplicate it one more time and call this duplicate answer. And I'm going to create another material. So again, we're repeating the same processes over and over. Call this one answers, change its type to be flat, create another animation sequence, call this answers. Again, I'm trying to keep it a similar naming convention. Choose its file, go to my answers folder, select the 5 images I've created and hit open. And then on my answers, set the animation sequence to be answers, and now we should have these answers also cycling through the 5 options at the same time. There we go. And I just need one more element, so I'm just going to, again, on my questions null object, right click and add a plane. This one I'm going to keep as a square because this one actually works really well as a square. Just going to pause that for a second. I'm going to drag this plane forwards a little bit. And I'm also going to drag my answer plane forwards just a little bit as well, just so it's slightly like a millimetre or so in front of the other one. So actually what's going to happen is the answers is going to mask the question, and then we want the timer to be on front of that, just so we don't get any clipping issues. Although we will be turning off def test, this is just another way of making sure we don't have that issue and covering all bases. So under assets, I'm going to add one more animation sequence, call this timer, go to choose file, navigate to my timer assets, so my countdown. And you'll notice that my countdown assets are named A, B, C, D, E, F. I wanted them to name them that way so we actually have them in reverse order. If I just went with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in that order it would be a count up. I actually want it to be a count down, so I have the end value being the first numerical or alphabetic number that will be detected. So that way it will make sure it's in the right order. So I tend to go A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. for the order, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. However, when you get to 11, the 1, 1 would repeat, so I tend to go with alphabetic lettering for conventions for sequences, just because I don't have duplicate potential there. So I'm going to hit open. So I'm going to go to my new plane, call this timer, create one more material. This new material we're also going to make sure it's flat, call this timer, and choose this to be our timer asset. So now we should have all these animations playing at the same time. Just going to move my timer asset up a little bit, just so it's sort of on the edge of the question or answer area. There we go. One next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to also create a canvas. This canvas I'm going to right click and add a rectangle. I'm going to again make sure that this is longer than it is high. So I'm going to go to about 100 by 50 and just pin this to the top corner. And I'm just going to give this the material of my logo. And the reason I want that is so when the effect is recording, I want a little logo branding in the top corner, just so when other people see the video, they'll be able to know what effect has been used immediately. It also just gives a kind of more branded look to the final piece. And I'm just going to call this logo corner. There we go. So done that. One more thing I'm going to do is if I wanted that kind of glow outline around the user, so I have this kind of like pink and bluish outline tinge. And the way I did that is I went to, I created another canvas, and I right clicked and added a rectangle. I made this rectangle fill the width and the height of my scene. I drag this canvas to be above my face tracker in the hierarchy, and I'm going to select the camera, go to texture extraction, click the plus, go to segmentation, click the plus, go back to my rectangle, create a new material. This new material is going to be my camera feed. Select my camera feed like so. And I'm going to choose the texture to be my camera texture. The alpha is going to be my segmentation, and the type is going to be flat. And now what I want to do is now start to create all my materials. I'm going to go to all my materials and change the adventure under options to be use dev test off. So I'm going to select all of my materials and do this. And this way it just ignores Z depth and they won't clip as much. Or when you start to move back or forwards in the scene, we shouldn't have this kind of occlusion happening that we don't want in this effect. So now I've got this sort of standard live feed in. I'm just going to call this live, and then going to duplicate that. And this one I'm going to call pink, and then duplicate one more time and call this other duplicate blue. I'm going to move the pink to one side slightly, and I'm going to move the blue to the other side slightly, making sure that my live rectangle is at the bottom. So if we remember, the way it orders in Spark is actually whatever's at the bottom is actually on the top. It's like a reverse Photoshop in terms of layer hierarchy. So I'm going to select my pink. I'm going to choose the camera feed material and duplicate that. On the duplicate of the material, I'm going to change this one to be a pink tinge. And I'm just going to reduce its opacity to around 50-60ish. Make sure I pick my pink material and choose my pink material. Then I'm going to go to blue. And I'm also going to just duplicate my camera feed one more time. This one I'm going to be colouring blue. And again, this is a step you don't need to do. I'm doing this because I just think this adds a bit more aesthetic style across the board. So I keep this kind of consistent 80s look to things. And now if I hit play, all of our elements should now be in our scene that we largely need. The only thing I would add later on is some speakers, but we'll get to that when we get to the patch editor side. So for now, we've done our prep, and now we can actually move on to the guts of this effect, which is the patch editor sequence. So I'm going to go to View and show my patch editor. And I want this to all be triggered via our screen recording action. So I'm going to go to my camera and drag that into my patch editor. What I'm also going to do is, just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm also going to use a screen tap. The screen tap won't be in the finished effect, but just so I can preview to make sure everything is working as I go along. Now this I would not recommend using in your final piece. This is just again for the purposes of demonstration, because I can't really emulate a screen recording action within Spark AR on the laptop. I'd have to then transmit to my phone and then show that way, which is a bit of a time-consuming process, as you can imagine. Okay, so now we have that in store. I'm going to select my questions plane and click the little visible option there and move that. I'm also going to select my answer and timer and add those two visibility options to my sequence. The answer, we're actually going to move over here for now, because this one isn't going to be started from the beginning. It's actually going to be activated towards the very end of our process. I'm going to select our intro and select that like so as well. And one more timer, questions, and we also need our canvas. So I'm going to select this canvas here, which has our logo in the corner assigned to it. And I'm also going to select that visibility as well. So let's set this up so it looks like the same as the products you'll be able to get through Gumroad and Patreon later. So we want to have it so when the screen recording action is fired, we're going to have it at a slight delay. And what this delay will do is it will, instead of everything toggling on or off instantly, we actually want the timer to appear after the selection has been made or a selection has been worked out, so in terms of the randomizer. So I'm going to change this to be a value of 3. So after 3 seconds our timer will become visible after the randomizer has chosen its 2 sequences later. Again, it'll make more sense towards the end. I'm trying to go through this in a kind of order from beginning to end. Some of this doesn't make sense until you sort of see the finished product. So again, I'm going to drag from screen recording to questions and screen recording to canvas. And what I'm going to do with logos, I'm going to select and drag, but I'm actually going to add a not gate in there first, and then link this up to the logo, like so. I'm just going to turn off the visibility for the time being of the answer because that's just getting in the way. What this should mean is at the beginning our logo is visible, so it's not disabled. And then once our screen recording action fires, it sends its pulse out and all of these will become visible, but this one will then be flipped and become not visible. So a not reverses the action essentially. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and just move all these up here, so these are kind of done with for now. I'm then going to drag from my screen recording action and add a pulse. So this pulse is like a action, it's just a single fire pulse essentially, as the name suggests. And what this pulse will do is it will be used to reset our countdown timer. So if you've seen a randomised video, and I'll explain it again briefly here, but you're going to use a runtime value with an offset to detect whether the time is met and an action is detected, so whether the screen recording and time equals true before the randomizer action fires. Otherwise we could end up with a potential mismatch system where the randomizer could fire even though the screen recording hasn't happened, and then you don't see the animation play, and it can kind of ruin the illusion of the effect and cause problems because then things can come out of sync. Hence why we're using this process. So I'm just going to right click and add a runtime. From this runtime I'm going to click and drag and add our offset. We're going to link the pulse turned on to the reset of the offset. I'm going to then go and drag from this offset to a less than. And I'm going to give this less than 3. I'm then going to add an and I'm going to link my screen recording to the top input on the and the less than to the bottom input on the and. Okay. I'm then going to click and drag from my and add a loop animation. I'm going to change its duration to be something like 0.07. I'm then going to drag from the looped action and add a random. And because we have 5 questions, it's going to be a random of 5. So likewise, every question I have, I also have to have the same number of answers. So bear that in mind. I'm only working with 5 questions and 5 answers just for time purposes. Again, there'll be an evolution of this over time on Gumroad and Patreon, so there will be more assets available in those versions as time goes on. This is kind of version 1 at this point in time. Okay. And I'm also going to click and drag from this loop up here and add an animation patch as well. And this loop will be linked to the play, but also the reset on this animation. So this animation here is actually going to be for our timer. And I'm going to set the duration to be 10. Now you might think, why am I setting the duration to be 10 when I've got 5 seconds or 5 points I'm counting down? It's because I tried putting in 5 and I found 5 too fast. And I found 10 kind of gives a kind of 5, 4, 3, 2 kind of beat, which just seemed to work better. Again, you can play about those values as you see fit. So again, by changing this value here, changing how fast the timer is and how else everything else will be fired essentially. So I'm going to drag from its progress on this animation and add a frame transition. And this is going to transition between our 6 frames. So our time actually is 5 frames, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then there's 1 extra frame, which is our time's up value that shows at the end. So there's 6 frames in total. I'm going to go back to my random patch for a second and then click from the value there and add a round. And then for the purposes of just checking things, I tend to add a value in. This value isn't needed. I'm putting it in there just for illustration purposes. So from that, I'm then going to go and select my answers. So I'm going to go to my answers, which is here. So A1 to 5. I'm going to go to the animation player, so answers. I'm going to select current frame. And I'm going to link this animation sequence answers to this round value here. And then I'm going to select my questions and do the same. So select questions, go to questions, animation sequence, advanced current frame, and link this also to my value patch here. So this will mean that this random will pick a value. That value will then be outputted, and both of these should have the same random value given to them because we've got one randomizer giving the same value to two sequences. Okay. So with this frame transition, so going back to that for a second, I'm going to go to my timer, and again select my timer, go to current frame, and link this current frame to the frame transition. And what I'm going to do here is something we haven't explored before, but I think in the long run will make things a lot neater and allow us to expand upon this in the future a bit easier. Is I'm actually going to add a sender and receiver patch, which is a fairly newish addition. It came in version 86. So I'm going to drag from the frame transition and add a sender. So this sender can take in numerical values, Boolean values, pulses, etc. So it can take a value from one area and then transmit it almost wirelessly to a receiver which can be linked to more outputs later on. I'm doing this for this because it just makes it a bit tidier, really. So I'm keeping this as a number, so it's going to take the value here. This value will be then inputted into here. I want this to then go to a receiver, so I'm going to add a receiver patch. And whenever we add a receiver, we need to make sure it's linked to a sender. So I click on the receiver, and you see a little drop-down arrow. I select the little drop-down arrow. I click the name of my sender, so I could always rename this to timer value, for example, and then make sure this is linked to timer value as well. And now I can have multiple senders and receivers with different names, do it across the board, but just making sure each one is identified differently. So I'm going to go from this timer value, and I'm going to add an equals exactly. And when this equals exactly 5, we want this to now show our answer and play a sound, essentially. So this is where we're going to now start to look at inputting our sound. So all I've done for this is I've just went onto the AR library and found some sounds. You can make your own. You need to make sure they're .m4a. Make sure you look at the Spark AR documentation on the Facebook page for information on formats for that. So I'm going to go to import from AR library. I'm going to look for a 80s sort of synth as an audio. Let's have a look what have we got. That's a sort of loop. I want a kind of looping one ideally. What do I use on my project? Let me just quickly go to my second screen for a second. So I'm going to go to, so it's synth pad. Do we have it? It's not the same sound, but I'll use this one for the purposes of just showing you this setup. Again, we can change this as we see fit. So I've imported that. I'm also then going to find a bell sound. So I'm going to go to bell and just import this into my project as well. Okay, and just pull this down. So we should now have our two audio files in our package. And what I need to do is I need to go to add asset, add audio playback controller. And I'm going to create one for our synth. I think I only need to create one because the other one's going to be a single shot. Yep. So I'm only going to create one for the synth because that's going to be our looping music. And I'm going to make sure that we'll set up in a second. Then I'm also going to go back to our equals up here. And I'm just going to get my answer down here and just link this up to this patch like so. I'm then going to drag from my equals exactly and add a pulse. I'm then going to create a single clip controller. I'm going to link the turned on to the play, the turned off to the stop, keeping the loop enabled. And I'm going to drag this to a audio player controller, and this is going to be our bell, so I select my bell alarm, drag that into my patch editor and link this up to my audio clip in my audio player. And now I need to go to my scene, add object, and I just need to add 2 speakers, so I'm going to add 1, and then I'm going to add 1 more speaker, 2. Our first speaker is going to be linked to our audio playback controller, so that's going to be our looping music that plays all the time. Our second speaker I'm just going to select the little arrow next to audio. I'm just going to input this into our audio player. So this will assign that speaker to that audio clip that is within that patch sequence, and it'll fire it off once essentially. That's the dream in this case. So with that done, that's already on. So that should be, once we start this audio player, this audio clip should loop to begin with. I'm just going to turn the volume down a little bit and make sure that my synth is correctly set up within the audio controller. So I want that to be a loop, which it is now. Okay, so let's just quickly double check everything before I go any further. Okay, so last little bits we need to do. I'm actually not going to use a screen tap to test this out. I'm actually going to sort of show it working on my phone, because I think actually that will just be easier in the long run and give you a more accurate representation. So I'm just going to get rid of the screen tap. We didn't need it in the end. I'm then going to drag from my runtime to a sort of space down here. I'm going to add a greater than. So if this is greater than 0, I want this to then play my audio playback controller. So on launch, this audio controller will be kicked into action. I could also add something in there to turn it off or disable if I wanted to, but for the time being, I'm going to have it just play indefinitely. Okay, so now if I go to send to device, I'm going to send this to my Instagram camera, and this is where I'm now going to have to sort of do a bit of tomfoolery here. So I'm just going to open up my screen recorder on my phone. Playing, which you might be able to hear, where I've got the logo at the beginning. If I click and hold on the record button, it should now start randomizing through the options. Then it will show us a timer. I'll start counting down, so I've got 3, 2, and then 1. And then it'll tell me what my answer was. So the answer should have been watch and a time up value. Once I let go of the record button, it will reset. It will reset back to the logo at the beginning, essentially. You may notice that because of the way we built this, we haven't really worried about the sizes of our planes or positions. Mainly because you can play that in your own time and move it how you see fit. I haven't really wanted to concern myself with that in this video, because that's pretty self-explanatory. You just select the appropriate plane and you just you adjust the scale and position values using the tools at the top. So this is what I'm going to call version 1 of our jumbled up application. I call it version 1 because we might be able to do some more additions to it. I'd love to be able to have it so when it gets to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it says those numbers obviously. I just haven't actually recorded any audio that does that yet. Also, we could also have things like particles fire when certain values are hit. And maybe another way of resetting, rather than letting go of the screen record button, we could also possibly use a screen tap to reset, so we can keep continuing on. But in theoretically, you could have infinite number of questions. You just need to make sure that each question and each answer has the same order. So when we put into animation sequence, each of them has the same value that's going to be hit at the same time. and then we just change our randomized value to be the last option within that set. So if it's 25, 25 random. Same with our timer, we can also just add more time to that by increasing your animation duration or adding more frames and adjusting the frame transition frames value to be according. But if we run it as a countdown, remember our last countdown value needs to be our first frame in our sequence. Okay, so sorry this has been a kind of long video, and like I said, hopefully the little bar at the bottom telling you where certain stages are has been useful. Remember, if you want to look at more things we can do with this, possibly look at the random series, which is in the description down below. This pack is available on Gumroad, will be available on Patreon to Patreon subscribers in the coming days, and we will possibly revisit this and add on to it over time based on your suggestions. So remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.